So let's look at just a few things that we can think about in a bottom line way on what we can do. So first of all, moderate weight loss and physical activity lowers inflammation, mediates this inflammatory process. Now, when I say moderate weight loss, I mean a weight loss that often is imperceptible. 5% of body weight loss, 7% of body weight loss. So we're talking 15 pounds, give or take. And yet that amount of weight loss, if it's done in a way that's sustainable, can make immeasurable differences on your long-term health. It cuts your risk of getting diabetes by about 60% in people who are at risk. It cuts the likelihood of a number of cancers by a significant amount. It cuts the likelihood of heart disease by a significant amount. So again, we're not talking about huge diets. We're not talking about losing 100 pounds. We're talking about very moderate decreases in weight that can make enough of a change in inflammation and other mediators of obesity's harms to significantly improve health. The process of inflammation is ubiquitous in the body. So if you were to fall and scrape your arm, for example, the process of healing, where there's a whole bunch of blood cells that come in and clean up the necrotic and the dead tissue and shoot it out, and then other blood cells come in and bring in nutrients and such to heal from that. That is a process of inflammation, and that's a very healthy process of inflammation. On the flip side, there's many other types and degrees of inflammation that occur in the body that aren't so healthy. So for example, traditionally, we thought of having a heart attack as a very simple process of you gain more and more cholesterol over your lifetime, and that clogs up the artery in your heart that the blood flows through, and eventually you clog it up enough that no blood can go through it, and you get a heart attack. And that's not at all what happens. What actually happens is that you do increase your cholesterol throughout life, and that does, to a small degree, clog that artery, but almost never enough that it clogs it off completely. What happens is when there's inflammation that goes on inside the wall of the artery where the cholesterol is, and it's very active in there, there's a lot of inflammation going on in there, and then eventually it breaks open a little bit, and just like with a cut, you get a clot. Essentially in that area where it breaks open, you get a clot there, and it's that immediate clotting secondary to the activity and the inflammation that's going on in the blood vessel that impedes the blood flow and leads to potentially a heart attack. So examples of good inflammation and bad inflammation, if you will, but the process itself is a ubiquitous process in the body. So the other piece of this is physical activity. If you've ever tried to exercise as part of a weight loss plan, my guess is some of you may have lost some weight sometimes, but most of the time, exercise doesn't lead to that much weight loss. It's just so easily overwhelmed by the amount of food that we tend to eat on a given day. For example, if you were to go to the gym and work out really hard for an hour, you have a half of a muffin or something like that, and you've already eaten as many calories as you've burned during that gym session. But exercise is one of the healthiest things that you can do for yourself. It relieves stress, it helps your joints, and it lowers inflammation. So again, the concept here is moderate. Moderate weight loss, moderate amounts of physical activity, even if it doesn't lead directly to weight loss, can significantly decrease inflammation and ultimately lead to a more reasonable way of managing both your weight and your long-term health over time. So another example we have here that we know of pretty well is what's called a cafeteria diet. Believe it or not, there's not very good data that a high-fat diet is either particularly good for you or particularly bad for you. And there's not very good data that shows that a low-fat diet is particularly good for you or particularly bad for you. I think preference is more important on whether you go toward one end or the other end on that. What we do know is that what we call a cafeteria diet is across the board known to be pretty darn unhealthy. And a cafeteria diet is pretty much the foods that you tend to have available to you at most cafeterias. So things like chips and cookies and muffins and so forth. So this is a cool study that was done. Again, this was done in mice, but we see similar things in humans. And they were randomized to one of 4 groups. They either got the standard chow diet, it's SC in this picture, or they got a low-fat diet, or they got a high-fat diet, or they got a cafeteria diet. And so the mice that got the standard chow, they didn't gain any weight, they had low levels of inflammation, they were good to go. The mice that ate either the high-fat or the low-fat diet, they gained a little bit of weight, they didn't have significantly increased inflammation, they went about their merry ways. The mice that got the cafeteria diet quickly and significantly gained quite a lot of weight, inflammation levels went up, and a number of other poor outcomes ended up having. So a cafeteria diet is high in, first of all, pretty unhealthy fats like saturated fats and trans fats and so forth. It's also very high in very simple sugars and starches like the starches that are in chips and so forth. It's also very high in salt, for example. Whereas a high-fat diet, that's high in fat from, say, fish, high in fat even from moderate fat poultry or even red meat, tends to be of a different type of fat, and which I'm actually going to talk about, and does not lead to these outcomes like with the cafeteria diet. Vegetable oils generally don't lead to the increased inflammation and weight gain from a cafeteria diet type of eating. So forget about, I would say forget about this special diet, that special diet, or the like. Very small guiding principles in a diet can be extremely valuable when it comes to the health benefits of that diet. And I think one of the key ones is if you can minimize the type of cafeteria foods you eat, you're going to be better off than with any other detailed diet. So this is a study that is just about to be published. There was about 40 people in it. It was done in a lab, and everything was very, very carefully controlled. And these people were randomized to one of 2 groups. Both groups were overfed, so they were purposely given 750 calories more than they needed every day. The goal in this study was to see how much weight they gained and how they gained it. Okay, so both groups got 750 calories of a high-fat muffin as how they overate, right? In one group, that high-fat muffin was made from oils that are very high in saturated fat. And in the other group, that high-fat muffin was made from oils that are high in polyunsaturated fats. And it was a really striking difference in what happened. So in the group that overfed, both groups gained weight. It was just over the course of a few weeks, they both gained around 3.5 pounds or so. In the group that ate the high saturated fat muffins, they gained almost all of that fat, almost all of that weight as fat. In the group that ate the polyunsaturated fat muffins, they gained very little fat. On the flip side, when we look at lean tissue or muscle, the group that was eating the polyunsaturated fat muffin, they gained quite a bit of muscle. So their weight gain was a healthy weight gain, whereas the group that ate the saturated fat muffin gained very little muscle. So this was just over the course of a few weeks. A really striking difference occurred just from the type of nutrient they were eating, the type of food they were eating. We know that saturated fats, specifically certain types of saturated fats, can cause that hypothalamic inflammation that I pointed out before. And we know that polyunsaturated fats often are anti-inflammatory. So that's another take-home that I think is very valuable. Moderating saturated fats, trying to increase your intake of polyunsaturated fats as part of a healthy diet can make a really tangible difference in inflammation levels, in weight levels. And so this is an example of what might be called an anti-inflammatory pyramid. So similar to the pyramids that the USDA makes, this specifically is looking at foods and proportional amounts of foods to eat in order to minimize inflammation. So, and on the next page, and you guys have it in your slides, I listed out some very specific examples. But here at the bottom, the foods that we want to eat the most of are sort of real foods. Fruits, vegetables, nuts, beans, legumes, whole grains, the healthy fats like the polyunsaturated and monounsaturated fats. So things like avocados and nuts have those kind of healthy fats in them. Fish and seafood, perhaps soy foods, mushrooms are a very healthy food, and so forth. And then at the top, in the area where you want to minimize those foods, certainly cafeteria diet type foods would be up there. Here you have dark chocolate, which is a very healthy snack in moderation, so that's one that you can eat there. Red wine in moderation can be anti-inflammatory, and actually any alcohol in moderation can be valuable around inflammation. Perhaps some supplements, tea, coffee are chock full of antioxidants and healthy nutrients. So thinking about it this way, for me at least, when I see these foods, I mean, these are a lot of the foods that I genuinely enjoy eating. And so this type of a cuisine is very much appealing to me. Here's a list, an easy way to think about some foods that are more pro-inflammatory versus others that are anti-inflammatory. So on the one hand, fast food, processed foods tend to be pro-inflammatory. What I call real foods tend to be anti-inflammatory. Again, fruits, vegetables, foods that God put on the earth, if you will. Trans fats and saturated fats, those are those high fat nutrients that can increase inflammation, as opposed to unsaturated and polyunsaturated fats. Sugars and starches are pro-inflammatory in excess. Fiber and low glycemic index foods tend to decrease inflammation. Glycemic index is a measure of how quickly a carbohydrate food is digested in the body. So essentially, if a food that is high glycemic index, like sugars and starches, it's absorbed very quickly into your body. It raises your blood sugar very quickly. That changes a whole bunch of hormones in your body, and that leads to downstream effects that are not so healthy. On the flip side, a low glycemic index food tends to be very slowly digested. It tends to be very slowly absorbed into your bloodstream. It doesn't peak your sugar level up or your insulin level up, and it tends to be much smoother in terms of your energy levels and in terms of a number of inflammatory markers. And you can easily just put glycemic index into Google, and it'll give you a whole list and teach you a whole bunch about that. So here's some more of these anti-inflammatory type foods. Inactivity or excessive activity, both can increase inflammation, whereas a moderate amount of physical activity can moderate inflammation. Weight gain, not in everybody, but in many people, tends to increase inflammation, and moderate weight loss tends to decrease inflammation. And so I left it there as some big picture things that hopefully you can take home and find useful.